Morning. I was working for a company, and there was a maintenance man there who had been there for a long time, and he did a good job. And he told me that in a couple of months he would be eligible for retirement and to collect his pension. At that time, he planned to return to his country, where the American dollar was worth so much more than the currency there. He would buy a house, relax, spend time with his family, and live happily ever after. And every day he would mark off the date on his calendar. But unfortunately, before that fateful day arrived, Murphy's Law threw a monkey wrench into his plans and he was let go, or I should say fired. But not for anything that he did wrong. It was simply a case of the company wanting to save money. It sucked, but it was legal. But to their credit, the company did dig into their coffers and they sprang for a cake, chocolate chip cookies, Coca-Cola, and they threw this guy a little retirement party. In the same company, there was a woman who was working there who had also been there for a long time, and she also did a good job, and she was asked to take a pay cut so that they could hire another employee. When she said no, she was let go. In this country, a worker works at will, meaning he can be fired for any reason or for no reason, as long as that reason is not illegal. What are the illegal reasons for firing someone? Well, you can't fire someone because of race, national origin, religion, genetic information, age, if that person is over 40, and disability, as long as it can be proved that this person couldn't do his duties even with accommodations. And if you have an employee and you ask that person to falsify insurance claims, to lie to government auditors, if you have a bookkeeper and you tell this person to alter the numbers of the financial records, if you have somebody who complains that he's not receiving minimum wage, or you have somebody who's complaining about sexual harassment, you can't fire these people because of retaliation. And then there are other less clear-cut reasons where when someone was fired and they filed a lawsuit, they did win financial compensation. For example, somebody is working at a company, it's going really well, but they have an opportunity to make more money at another company. And the boss at the other company tells this person, if you work for us, as long as you do a good job, you can be here for as long as you like. So the person says, can you put it in writing? The boss says, our word is our bond. So the person ends up quitting the job they already have. He sells his house because the new job is in an area which is too far to commute to. Then he buys a house in the new location and proceeds to work at the new job. Short time down the road, he's let go. He sues and he wins financial compensation, even though the agreement wasn't in writing. It was just verbal and/or implied. Then there are even other less clear-cut reasons where if you had a group of people, some people would side with the employee, some people would side with the employer. Very often, the determining factor as to who wins the case is decided by the interpretation of the presiding judge. And you have to also remember that laws vary from state to state, and new laws are being passed all the time. aside from illegal reasons to fire someone, when the legality of it is not an issue, what is the best way to go about firing someone? What is the most expeditious way? First of all, getting fired is a traumatic experience. It could even be devastating. I always think of that scene in the movie Wall Street when one of the old-time stockbrokers is getting the boot from the sales manager, and this guy is desperate. He says, "Harry, you and I go back a long ways together. You fire me, I'm finished. I have nothing left. I put a lot into this company." And sales manager says, "Yeah, and you took a lot out too. You know that. You should have had something put away." And the stockbroker says, "Yeah, but with the divorces and all, I never had a chance." I've been fired on numerous occasions. One time, I was fired from McDonald's. The sales manager comes up to me and he says, "It's about time we had a meeting of the minds." And he proceeded to reiterate one of the questions that I had asked another employee. And he said, "That's a dumb question." I don't remember what the other things were that I did wrong, but probably one of them was not learning the order of the toppings on the Big Mac fast enough. But anyway, the meeting actually ended amiably. He ended up telling me some things about himself, shaking my hand, and he even offered me a word of encouragement. He said, "Just because I couldn't cut it here did not necessarily mean that I couldn't walk into the Burger King down the road and make it there." I'd be terrible at firing people because I don't think I have the personality for it, but I was once a real estate agent for a Century 21 office, and the sales manager there had absolutely no qualms about firing people. We would have our sales meetings once a week at a diner, and one week we had our meeting, and then we all went back to the office afterwards. And in front of everyone, she starts ripping into one of the agents. "I'm sick and tired of watching you fall asleep every week during our meetings and not producing. And I think you would be better off just taking your license and going someplace else." Ouch. Later, I heard somebody telling one of the owners what happened, and his reaction was, "Let him not make any money for someone else." So, how do you go about firing someone when you want to fire someone? First of all, everybody, unless somebody has done something egregiously wrong, like they've stolen things, they vandalized things, they started fights, everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. Because first of all, as we have seen, when someone gets fired, it's not always because they're incompetent. Sometimes someone is highly competent, it's just a personality thing. Or sometimes someone is highly competent, but they're just not a good fit for what they have to specifically do at a specific company. And, you know, in the world of sports, managers and coaches are fired all the time. George Steinbrenner, the late coach of the New York Yankees, he was famous for firing managers left and right. And in the NBA, in basketball, coaches are fired all the time. Now, if you have a phenomenal coach, tons of experience, knows the game inside out, could that coach sometimes make the difference between whether a team wins a game or not? Absolutely. But if you have a really lousy team, you could have the best coach in the world and the team is still going to lose, because ultimately the game is played by the players. The coach cannot go onto the court and play the game for them. But if a team loses 15 games in a row, ownership and management feel that they owe something to their paying customers, so they have to shake things up. So the coach is the one who gets the boot. Now, it doesn't mean that when the new coach comes in, he's going to wave a magic wand and all of a sudden the team is going to start winning. But the philosophy is it's better to do something than nothing. So, getting back to firing people in small businesses, how do you go about it? Well, let's say it's a 9-to-5 kind of a job. And the payroll day ends on a Friday. It's not a good idea to tell that person, obviously, on Friday morning that we're letting you go if they expect him to work that day, because the person isn't going to be very motivated to put in a good day's work if he knows he's getting fired anyway. He might even try to do something naughty for spite if he feels the firing is unjustified. It's also not a good idea to tell that person, oh, before you leave here today, I'd like to see you in my office. Because then all day, he's going to be worrying about what's going to be going down later on, and naturally he's going to be imagining the worst. The best time to fire someone is about 10 minutes before the end of the working day in which you want to fire him. So it could be kept short and sweet. And before the meeting takes place, you should establish in your mind that the decision is non-negotiable. Because if you are weak, and if you are wishy-washy, and if you allow for wiggle room, the person will take advantage of it. Oh, come on, can't you just give me another chance, please? I promise to do better. I'm 2 months behind in my rent. My wife is pregnant. The transmission just went on my car. All these things are irrelevant, because when you work for a business is not a charity. When you work for a business, it is a value for value relationship. The worker is paid in accordance to the value that he brings to the company. If the worker does a great job and he's paid well, then it's a win-win situation for everyone. And being weak and wishy-washy is not just confined to business situations. It applies in all aspects of life. I was once driving for a car service, and one night there were no calls, so I was parked someplace, and a driver from the same company pulls up alongside me, and I didn't even know him. And he starts begging me to lend him money with the promise that he's going to pay me back tomorrow and even give me an extra buck. And I said something like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't really have any money, whatever. But this guy attached on to me like a leech, and he wouldn't let go. It was the kind of situation where if I hadn't been there at that particular time, the world would have come to an end. And the other thing going through my mind is, let's say hypothetically this guy were honest. How would I find him the next day anyway? When you drive for a car service, everyone is always in a different place at the same time. But by coincidence, we happen to have been parked right next to the building where I happened to have been living at the time. It was a very conspicuous building, and it had 24-hour doormen. So I told this guy, you know, we don't even have to find each other tomorrow. All you have to do is drop off at that building there, drop off my money with the doorman. And of course, he assured me he would do so. And I don't think I have to tell you the rest of the story. Anyway, I told my brother what happened, and I said to him, maybe I should have just told that guy one more time. And immediately, he stopped me, cut me off. He said, no. He said, you say no one time, and then the conversation is over. And he was right. So, getting back to small businesses, let's say somebody's been coming late to work on a regular basis. The boss asks this employee to please come on time, but the pattern continues. He's coming late on a regular basis. Finally, the owner has a talk with the guy, tells him how important it is for him to come on time if he wants to work for this company. Because let's face it, if you're coming late to work on a regular basis, but you're being paid for the entire day, that is theft of service. But this guy continues to come late. Finally, the boss says, you know, I've told you many times about your lateness. The next time you come late, we're going to have to let you go. The next day, the guy comes late. The owner says, I'm sorry, but we're letting you go. The employee says, but my car broke down. The employer says, you can pick up your check up until today's date with the secretary at the front desk. The employee says, I just told you my car broke down. I specifically set my alarm clock an hour early this morning to make doubly certain that I would be here on time. But if someone's car breaks down, how do you expect him to be there on time? The owner says, good luck to you and have a nice day. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. The fact is, this guy was not fired because his car broke down. He was fired for the cumulative amount of times that he was late for work, and he was given ample opportunity to rectify the situation. His car breaking down was merely the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, I've talked about firing people a lot. Why haven't I even discussed hiring people? And the reason is, if you do your due diligence when you're hiring someone, there'll be less of a chance that you'll have to fire somebody. Now, some employers like to use sites like Indeed.com or ZipRecruiter.com, or go through employment agencies or do their own advertising. Whatever the case may be, when you have an applicant, this person, you should run a background check on that person. If he put down on his resume or application other companies that he worked for with supervisors' names, those people should be contacted, because if this worker did a lousy job at another company, it's very unlikely that the supervisor there is going to give him a glowing review and pass on his headaches to somebody else. If the person did a great job, then he has a great reference. If the person puts down that he has a PhD in math from MIT and he's a high school dropout, those things are easily checked. Now, whenever you hear about interviews, you always read a whole list of questions which are supposedly good things to ask applicants when they're interviewing. And one of the most common is, why should we hire you? which I actually don't think by itself that that's a very good question to ask. Because, let's face it, what else is somebody going to say? I'm honest, I'm trustworthy, I'm a hard worker, I'm loyal, I'm a team player. I mean, who's going to voluntarily offer negative information about themselves? It reminds me of female personal ads that I've seen on Craigslist before they terminated them, and that I've seen on dating websites, where a woman would have beautiful pictures of herself posted on her profile, and then a glowing bio in her profile. And then at the end, she would write, "No assholes, losers, liars, jerks, creeps, or perverts." And I'm thinking to myself about a guy reading this ad. Wow, what a gorgeous woman. What an impressive bio. I'd do anything to date a woman like that, but damn it, I happen to be an asshole and a jerk, so I can't respond to that ad. I've seen many assholes and jerks in my life, but I've never seen one who knew that he was one. And by saying no liars in the ad, is she really counting on the guy to be honest about his dishonesty? So a much better question is, what qualities do you possess that would be a good fit for our company? Because if this guy answers that question in an intelligent and coherent manner, it means he knows something about your company. He's done his homework, and that's impressive. Another good question is, what is it about this job or profession that appeals to you? Two people were applying for the position of real estate salesman at a real estate office. And sales manager asked the first guy, "Why do you want to be in real estate?" And he said, "Because I like houses." The other guy says, "You know, when somebody buys a house, it's probably the biggest financial decision that that person is ever going to make in his life. And I love the feeling that I get when I have matched up someone with a house that they love, that meets their needs, that they can afford, that they're going to spend time with, raise their families in, call home, and that I'm getting paid well at the same time." Who gave the better answer? Another very good question to ask is, toward the end of the interview, do you have any questions? Because this will determine whether this person wants to work for your company long range or not, whether he wants to learn and grow with the company. That is not always the case. Sometimes you see people who are waiters or cab drivers, and they tell you, "Oh, I'm really an actor," or "I'm really a writer. I'm just doing this to pay the bills until I make my big break." So if somebody answers that question, do you have any questions? What time do you have lunch? I mean, that tells you a lot about that candidate also. I'm a pianist, and when I would interview at music schools for the position of piano teacher, and they'd say, "Do you have any questions?" One of the things I would ask is, "Do you have a lot of recitals here?" Student recitals, because that's important. Because part of learning an instrument is playing for other people, sharing the music with other people. And what better way to do so is at a recital, when you have to deal with nervousness and stage fright and all that stuff. And if you also, when you're given a deadline, you know you have to perform on such and such a date, students will practice because they know they don't want to embarrass themselves in front of everyone. And then if they perform and certain things don't go quite as well as they would have liked, they didn't fail. They just learned what worked and what didn't work when they were under pressure. And then they know what to work on harder for the next time in order to do better. Now, one of the most powerful things I think you could do in a hiring situation is to implement a probationary period, 4 weeks or so, whatever the specific amount of time happens to be, where the person is not officially hired until they can prove that they can do a great job for you. Because you can have somebody who showed up for the interview, he had great educational background, had a lot of experience, he dressed well, was well-groomed, he offered you a firm handshake, he looked you directly in the eye, he spoke well, he was smooth, but it does not necessarily mean that that person will be the best person for the job. He might be, but it doesn't guarantee that he will be. You never really know until the person actually starts working for you. So the person with the best resume is not always the best person for the job. I've heard women say, I only want a man who's over 6 feet with a full head of hair, Ivy educated, a doctor, a lawyer, CEO, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they actually meet a man with all those characteristics. He's perfect on paper, but turns out to be everything she doesn't want. I had a... Also, I wanted to add that in certain lines of work, things like resumes and applications are actually completely irrelevant. I had a music professor in college who was also an opera conductor, and he told us that whenever singers came to him for work, he would tell them, don't show me your awards, don't tell me where you went to school, what competitions you won, who you studied with, where you've sung. You see this music? Sing. And that told him all he needed to know. As a pianist, whenever I see a piano anywhere, including here, in a restaurant, a lounge, I always inquire, do you need a pianist here? One time, I went in, I asked someone that question, and she said, you can fill out an application. Another time, somebody said, do you have a resume? That is the stupidest thing that anybody could possibly say to me in a situation like that. Because if I'm the manager or owner of a restaurant or a lounge that has a piano, and someone says, do you need a pianist here? The only thing I'm going to think of is, please play something for me. And in about 10 seconds, I will know whether or not, I will know everything that I need to know about that person. So, person is on a probationary period with their company. After the 4 weeks, the person does a fabulous job. Then after the 4 weeks probationary period, he's officially hired. Then you have someone else, and no matter how hard you try to make it work, you realize that it's just not going to work. This person is just not going to work out. After the 4 weeks, the person is not fired because they were never hired in the first place. It was just an audition. Now, earlier I was discussing legal issues regarding firing people. But there's also legal issues regarding hiring people. And I want to read you a little passage in this book. This is the Employer's Legal Handbook by Fred S. Steingold. It's kind of like the Bible of laws related to hiring and firing, and it's periodically updated, and there's also suggestions for additional reading on various specialty topics. So anyway, some illegal practices are obvious, such as advertising a job for people ages 20 to 30 or paying lower wages to women than men. Other types of discrimination are more subtle, but just as illegal. Employment practices that have a disproportionate and discriminatory impact on protected groups are also barred by anti-discrimination laws. For example, if your primary means of seeking job candidates is through word of mouth and your workforce consists entirely of white men, the word of mouth system could constitute illegal discrimination if it results in an applicant pool of mostly white men. The effect of the procedures is what counts, even if you did not intend to discriminate. This passage actually made me angry because let's say you had somebody who, through word of mouth and through his advertising, tried to procure a candidate to work at his company. But what if the entire demographics of that area, far and wide, only consisted of white men? And what if somebody, now here's another scenario. Let's say this person did his advertising, a word of mouth, and he procured 2 candidates. One was white, one was black. And in his company, there were either 99% or 100% white workers. How could this employer then prove? Then he interviews the 2 applicants, and he determines that the white applicant is more qualified. How could this employer then prove that his decision to hire the white applicant had absolutely nothing to do with race? And how about also the position that if you have a private company, that you should be entitled to hire whoever the hell you want to, because it's called freedom. But sometimes the law does not conform to what you think is right or wrong. Several weeks ago, I called Allison and I asked her if it would be okay if I brought copies of my book, Rational Polemics, here in case anyone wanted to check it out. It is not about hiring and firing practices for small businesses. However, one of the chapters, specifically the one on racism, deals with situations such as this, where somebody potentially got in trouble even when he had absolutely no desire to do anything unethical. But in the particular municipality in which this person's business was, there was a mandate stating that you have to practice racial diversification in the workplace. So I discuss this sort of thing because this is the same kind of thing that's happening throughout universities all over the country, that plus affirmative action. Now, by the way, if anybody would like to give a critique, positive or negative, of my little talk here afterwards, the first 5 can get a free copy of this book. Just see Eric here afterwards. But very, very important. Sometimes you may be in a hiring or a firing situation where you think you're doing everything right, where you think it's just a matter of common sense. But the law will not always agree with you. I'm sure all of you have heard of situations where somebody leaves their keys in the ignition of their car. And then a criminal goes and steals the car, then commits all kinds of destruction and crimes. Then he goes home, he goes to sleep. Then the next day, he takes your car again, goes out, commits more crimes, more destruction. Who is liable for all of this? That's right, the person who left their keys in the ignition of their car. Even if they were a saint who flew down from heaven, or even if they were in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. You know, they innocently and absent-mindedly just left their keys in the car. Because the law says that if you leave your keys in the ignition of your car, it's like inviting someone, here, take my car. So, you may think that what you're doing is a common sense situation, where you have absolutely no intention of doing anything unethical, but the law will not always agree with what you think is right or wrong. So my advice to you, in those situations, if there is ever any doubt of the legality of a hiring or firing situation, always check with an attorney who specializes in that kind of thing. It might be expensive, but it's far less expensive than if you're ever involved in a lawsuit, especially if you lose one. Thank you.